I absolutely hated being an activist, and activism wasn't something that I enjoyed. I had to do this. It was a sense of duty. I knew what was happening in Iran was wrong. That's when evil prevails, when the good people decide to stay silent. I just can't stay silent when I see evil. If I see evil, I've got to do something. Otherwise, I can't sleep at night.
This episode explores a tension that shows up in many men's lives. The pull between personal freedom and a sense of duty, and what happens when walking away never quite feels like an option. To bring that tension to life, I'm joined by Potkin Azarmehr, a British investigative journalist and documentary filmmaker, who shares what it feels like to be called into work you didn't choose, and why staying silent was never an option. If this conversation resonates, support the mission. Please kindly subscribe and leave a review. It helps the show grow, and that means that we can reach more men who are ready to take that next step. Thank you so much. I'm Harrison, and this is the Growth Voyage podcast. Enjoy.
Okay, the red light's on. Potkin, welcome to the show.
Good to be on your show, Harrison. Thanks for asking me to do this podcast with you.
Yeah, most welcome. I'm really keen to dive straight into this, but for those who don't know you, what are you doing currently? How do you spend your days? And how did you get into it as well? Why is it important to you?
Oh, this is going to be a very long answer. I've had 4 career changes in my life. I qualified as an engineer to begin with. I worked as a mechanical engineer for a couple of years. Then I went into software and I became a Oracle database consultant. Then I moved into business intelligence. And then about 14 years ago, a friend of mine got some proper funding to start a Persian-speaking TV, satellite TV station that would broadcast to Iran. He called me out of the blue. He said, do you want to help me with this TV? I said, what do I know about TV? He said, I just trust your judgment. And so I thought that's the sort of like offer that you don't get again in your life, something that I have to do just to see what it was like. To be honest with you, I expected it to last about 2 years. It went on for 14 years. So I was a TV producer. I was anything that I could do in the TV station. I was anything that was in my capabilities, with helping with the news department. I was going in front of the camera as a commentator. I was doing documentaries. I was traveling around the world doing different things, and it was a very special experience. It was really good. The funding for the TV station ran out, and to be honest with you, I had a few differences as well towards the end anyway. And then since then, I've been working with think tanks. I'm an investigative journalist, and my area of speciality expertise is extremism, terrorism, especially the Islamic extremism, the Middle East, because my background is I was born in Iran. I came to this country when I was 12. Before the revolution, I was at a boarding school, Royal Merchant Navy boarding school. And then the revolution happened in Iran. After the revolution, I went there a couple of times, once for the Easter holiday, once for a summer holiday. And I knew that I couldn't live there. I knew that, an Islamic state was just not my cup of tea. So I just didn't go back. So I came back to my boarding school, finished my boarding school, went to university, then got married and stayed in this country. And I haven't been back to Iran since, I think it was almost 1 year after the revolution. So 1980 was the last time I was in Iran. So I've been away from Iran since then, but I've followed the news every day. There hasn't been a single day where I haven't followed what's going on in Iran. I have developed an expertise in it. And the fact that so many of my shows on that TV station was so successful means that even though I've been away from Iran for such a long while, I haven't really lost the, I'm not out of the loop with what's going on there. I must have my finger on the pulse if I had so many popular programs.
Yeah, well, it was really interesting hearing your sort of origin story, if you like, the fact that you kind of got dragged into it quite naturally, even though you had no interest in it whatsoever beforehand. I think that's a wicked lesson just in there of just take the opportunities that are handed to you. Is that something that you've always been like? Have you always been one to go, you know what, let's just follow this path, see what happens? Have you always taken a risk?
No, and actually quite contrary to that, because I've almost lived on my own since I was 12. You know, my parents were in Iran, and my family was in Iran. I was here on my own, didn't have any family. I've always been very hesitant about taking risks. I've always liked that security, so a lot of my friends did well in business. They took risks. I was always, I like to have a sort of like a fixed job, 9-to-5 job with a salary that is guaranteed, but maybe do something on the side, in the evenings, weekends, that sort of thing to supplement that income. That was the way forward for me. And when my friends called me out of the blue, I was actually earning really good money. I was working in Europe. I was earning about 500 euros a day. And I was actually taking a big drop in income to go with this TV station. But that was just so unique. I wasn't trained as a TV producer. I wasn't trained as anything to do with a television station. No one else was going to make me that offer. And I had a chance to really make a difference inside Iran. And we did make a huge difference. We changed the mindset of the Iranians with the programs that we made. A lot of what is going on in Iran at the moment is because of that change that we were behind doing.
Yeah, and in terms of your passion for it, right, because some people, they get very involved into politics and world situations. A lot of the time, a lot of people sort of shut away from it and they kind of see it all as like negative and fear. What was it for you that really invoked something in you to speak about this stuff and make a difference?
Actually, what you just said actually applies to me. I absolutely hated being an activist. I had so many other interests in my life, and activism wasn't something that I enjoyed. It was more to do with I had to do this. It was a sense of duty. I knew what was happening in Iran was wrong, and I could do something by being outside Iran. And if I didn't do it, who else would do it? So it was that sense of duty. I've also had a few people that have influenced me in my life. One of them was my maths teacher at school, who was also a chaplain. And one advice he gave me, he said, always be wary of ideologies and people that don't like being asked questions. Because if they don't like being asked questions, that means there's something wrong. There's something that they're trying to hide. So I've always been this sort of like very free thinker. I like to ask questions about everything. I always like to challenge the official narrative. I want to listen to all sides and then decide what is best. And an Islamic state was dogma, pure and simple, 100%. You couldn't be a free thinker. You couldn't ask questions. So it was so obvious for me that it was wrong. I mean, a lot of my friends that I went to school with, they were taking part in the revolution. They were swept by it. And I remember arguing with them on the couple of occasions that I went to Iran. I said, look, what is this Islamic Republic that you're going for? And they would say, oh, this is not the time to ask questions. This is the time to remain united. I said, what does that mean? I said, this is exactly the time you should ask the question. You're going full support of something that none of you really know what it's about because you're not asking questions. So it was just a sense of, it wasn't something that I was enjoying to do. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. I just thought, I've got to do it. Otherwise, I'm not the man that I want to be. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, let's dig into that. And that's a really interesting point because it's come up on the podcast fairly recently too. This sense of honor. Where is this 21st century man who's got honor and stands up for what he believes in? And it sounds like in your case there was a real sense of that. It's like, hang on, I care about this country. My family's obviously there. I can make a difference there.
Yeah. And in fact, in the last 2 or 3 years, my priority has actually been England, because I see what happened in Iran in a way duplicating itself and repeating itself here. And at the end of the day, look, I've lived most of my life here. You know, I feel very English. My children are born here. I've got 3 kids. They're all born here. They have their future in this country. And I've got to leave behind the sort of country that I remember when I first decided to settle here. And I can see things going wrong here. So I thought 3 years ago, I thought, right, I've done what I should have done and what I could have done for Iran. Now it looks like I've got to save Britain. So I was more involved in UK issues for the last 3 years. But because of what happened recently in Iran, you know that scene from Godfather, I think it's Godfather 3, where he says, like, he wants to get out of the mafia business. And he goes, like, every time I try to get out, something just pulls me back in. And it was sort of like, since the recent protests, I've sort of like been pulled back in again. Not because I've wanted to, but because I had to. I couldn't stay away from it. But equally as concerned I am about what is going on in this country. Because, like I said, I mean, I can see similarities that are raising my alarm bells, and they have been for quite a few years. I don't know what it is. Look, I'm quite late in my years. I want to be able to enjoy my life. I want to play golf and want to maybe continue with martial arts. Like, you know, I know you're a jiu-jitsu practitioner, and that's how we got to know each other. We had some, you know, common interests when we met each other in the gym. I'm just sort of like dragged into it. It's as if like I'm destined to fight Islamic extremism to the rest of my life.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating, isn't it? I think for a number of reasons, but like you were saying, I think because you've seen it happen almost firsthand, really, you can see the same sort of patterns happening over. It's not necessarily an enjoyment, but it's more of a sense of, well, I know that I'm good at what I do in terms of reporting stuff, gathering information, and
I have the experience of what I can see is round the corner, and I know how to stop it, and I can contribute towards that. That's what I see. And if I don't do it, then I've absconded my duty.
Interesting. So is your belief then, if people know about this, is that enough to then stop the same patterns happening, do you think, or does it go deeper than that?
Look, my favourite quote is from Edmund Burke, and that is, "Evil only prevails when the good stay silent." It's not just because evil people do evil things, it's also because you have this silent majority that decide not to say anything. And that's when evil prevails, when the good people decide to stay silent. And I just can't stay silent when I see evil. I have to speak out. I mean, there's a lot of other people who've paid a much heavier price than me. You know, they've lost their livelihood, they've lost their lives. Fortunately, I haven't been in that situation, but I just feel like if I see evil, I've got to do something, you know? Otherwise, I can't sleep at night.
It's kind of a pull within you, essentially, like you were saying. It's not necessarily a hobby or even though that was alluded to before, but it's more so actually I kind of need to say something because otherwise I become like one of the people who stand back and do nothing in a way. Yeah,
I think you hit it on the nail there. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
It does make you think, because I remember I had this attitude of, okay, well, everything that you see on the news is designed to stir a certain narrative, and a lot of it's fear-induced. And I know when you sort of live in that place of, the world's terrible and the world's bad, that doesn't do great things for your belief system and your and I think just a way of sort of seeing the world. Although I also see on the flip side how actually if you just ignore what's going on, could you perhaps be playing a part in that as well? Do we have a sense of duty to know about what's going on around us? It's a really tough pull, because I think in some instances it can overwhelm people and almost disempowers them in a way.
So I think it's also important to be realistic about what you can do, because look, you can't change the world. And I remember the first time I came across the Serenity Prayer. Have you heard of that? The Serenity Prayer? First time I saw it was actually on the tube. You know, when sometimes they advertise poems and that. And I was just like, just accidentally looked it up, and I sort of started reading it, and I was finding it hard to fight back the tears. Like on the tube, grown man, he's suddenly like, he's going like this, And basically, this is what it says. It says, "Dear Lord, grant me the serenity to accept things that I cannot change, but the courage to change the things that I can change, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two." And I thought that was spot on. I mean, look, I know that I can't sort of like go back to Iran right now and, pick up a gun and fight in the streets or something. That's not me. That's not something that I can do. There's certain things that I'm good at, certain things that I can do. I'm good at telling what's happening in Iran to the outside world, for example, to the non-Iranian audience, to explain what's happening in Iran. And there are things that are outside my capability, and it's what other people can do better than me. So it's also very important to be realistic, to know exactly what you can do. How much are you prepared to give? How much are you prepared to lose? And be very realistic and true with yourself on that.
It's a great point. I think if you can decipher what actions you'd not only need to take, but then also what would be the consequences of those actions, especially with what you're doing, there seems to be a lot of sort of repercussions for that. And so it's, again, I believe the phrase is, if you find something, or whenever you pursue something, is it worth, I think it was Alex Hormozy said, suffering for? But then, I think just, is it worth the journey, essentially, no matter what comes out of it? And I think that resonates with me. I think rather than sort of saying, oh, what should I be doing? Or, oh, this person's doing this, maybe I should hop along too. Actually just taking the time to think for yourself. It kind of ties in with what your whole message is all about. And I realized this with myself too, even building a business, for example. You see so many people and gurus doing it their way. And the first thing you do when you go into business, you follow this way because, oh, this is what everyone else is doing. This is my way. But then you realize, no, actually there's loads of other different ways of doing things. And I think we've got to go through that journey to realize, no, like, people will have their opinions, people will have their way of doing things, but it's all down to me to figure out actually what resonates with me. There isn't a one size fits all. And I think you see this tendency, not just on a personal scale, with trying to fit into a box, but I think you see this society wide as well, that the majority of people might think one way. And if you don't think the same way, suddenly you're the bad guy, for example. And I think it seems there's a lot of pressure sometimes. I think especially like younger men as well, to form part of maybe one side of the coin, whereas actually, hey, maybe you need a bigger view of what's going on entirely.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said earlier, I like to listen to all sides of a story before making up my mind. And I'm always happy to be proven wrong and to change my mind. Some people think like, once they set their mind on something, then they shouldn't change their mind. I think that is really wrong. I think you should. It takes a lot of courage to say that actually I was wrong in what I was thinking, and I'm changing my mind. This is the thing. I like being open-minded. And with regards to, so like just moving on from what you were saying about, you know, like horses for courses and different things, there's two more advice that I was given that I think was very valuable to me, and I'd like to pass it on to other people as well. One was to always make sure that you have a strong economic base, you know, that you're self-assured about your living, because it's when you're in need that you trample on your principles, you know, thinking about like, oh my God, you know, how am I going to make ends meet sort of thing, like, you know, then the pressure on you to put down your principles becomes greater. Whereas if you're at least confident that, look, you know, okay, you know, say for example, I found out something about this job that I'm doing, I'm going to lose some income, but I'm not going to starve because, you know, I've made sure that, you know, I can look after myself and do other things. You know, it might be a little bit harder, whatever, like, you know, but you should never be in a situation where the demands of you making ends meet, you know, when you become so needy that you go back on the things that you believe. And the other thing, the other advice is that if you're going to come in to do something like which you think you're doing good and all that, don't ever expect anyone to say thank you. Don't ever expect anyone to even remember you. You're doing it for yourself, nobody else, because no one will remember you. No one's going to thank you. And if you're doing it, it's all because you're doing it for yourself so that you can sleep at night with a clear conscience.
It's interesting you mentioned these two ways of navigating the world, or in this regard, because I remember listening to, it was a book, it was A Happy Pocket Full of Money. So it's all about how to expand your wealth consciousness, and actually listed both of those things, but in a slightly different way. And one way to expand your wealth, for example, is actually to give more, but without expecting anything in return. So that's just your natural way of being. And there was a second element to what you mentioned as well, which is as soon as that fear takes over, you think, oh, how am I going to make ends meet? How am I going to, that's going to end up projecting onto your reality. It is, essentially. And like you said, you'll compromise your values.
You'll deviate from your path,
Yeah, absolutely. So is that something that you experienced yourself, or has just come with time, would you say?
Fortunately, when I was given that advice, I was, again, very young. And I always tried to pass on that advice to other people. And fortunately, it hasn't happened to me yet. I haven't been in that precarious situation where I've had to sort of put down my principle because, you know, I needed the money sort of thing. But I've seen other people do it, you know, and it's sad watching them. You know, people that said, oh, you know, I'll never do this, I'll never be able to do this and that. And then because they have to feed their children, because they have to feed their family. They've had to put down their beliefs, their principles. And it's sad because you can see they're not happy doing it, but they have to.
So your sense of sort of, honor and values there, I can sense they're actually a big, you value your values essentially a lot more. And perhaps I think that's something which a lot of men need as they navigate the world. They need to know their values. They need to know what they stand for. And that, I think, acts as quite a good decision-making filter for just how you navigate the world, right? And
like I said before, I mean, you've got to know your values, but you've got to know how much you can part with as well. Don't, take on a bigger cake than you can actually eat. Because if you can't do it, if you come stuck, then it's not going to look good, So you've got to sort of it's a very important calculation of what you want to achieve, how much you can achieve. It's that serenity prayer again. I think, everyone should read that. I think that should be on every tube. Everyone should be aware of it.
Well, I think wisdom's, I think discernment as well. I think that's one of the biggest gifts we can ask for, because I think when you have that, like you said, you're able to navigate certain situations. And I also wonder if you've always been able to integrate that poem, right, that message, because especially with the work that you're doing, I can imagine there's been times where you've been tested, you've questioned perhaps not why you're doing it, but I think you have to kind of remind yourself of like your mission in a way, of being in that space. I'm not sure, I'm just seeing it from my lens. I can imagine it takes its toll on you.
It does, and it has taken its toll on me. I would have liked to spend a lot more time with my family. I mean, it's interesting. Just give you one example. Every year, the Iranian regime holds these rallies throughout Western Europe, including London and other cities. It's called Al-Quds Day rally. It's the end of Ramadan. And their supporters come on the streets of Britain with pictures of Iran's supreme leader and et cetera, And I was always telling these opposition activists, that, look, how can you tell people in Iran to go out on the street when they come on the streets of London here and you don't have a counter protest? You know, you don't do anything about it. How can you allow this and then expect so much from people in Iran who would be risking so much more? So for a few years, I've been trying to organise some sort of counter protest. Most people were just like, they were too frightened to come out, sort of thing. Until I managed to get about 7 people to say yes to me. At that time, I was going through a divorce, and I had my 7-year-old boy, and I was, weekends we were together, we was with each other. The Al-Quds Day rally that year fell on a Saturday when I had to look after my boy. And I couldn't say to these 7 people, actually, I can't come this year myself because I'm looking after my 7-year-old boy. So I had to drag him along with me, and I know that he hated all that. He didn't want to, he wanted to spend time with his dad, play football, do things in that, And we got there, straight away I got into a fight and I could see him screaming, getting frightened and but it was just out of my control. There's nothing I could do. And then he went and told his mum about it. And then his mum was writing to the solicitor that, he's taking the boy to these protests and things like that. I mean, that's just one small example of the things that you want to do, but the things that you end up doing that you don't want to do, and I can go on about it with more examples, but I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. To be honest with you, I wanted to have a different life. I wanted to have a normal life. I wanted to just go to work, do something that I enjoy, earn money, spend time with the family, and do all the different hobbies and interests that I've got, and put my time in that. Activism and all this sort of thing wasn't something that I wanted to do when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I wanted to join the special forces in the army in Iran. Then things changed there. Then I tried to join the territorial army here, and I failed the first physical test, and then other things happened, and I couldn't sort of continue in that. So things haven't gone exactly the way I wanted them to go, But I look back on my years, and it's been an exciting life. I've done a lot of things that a lot of people haven't been able to do. I've been to a lot of places that a lot of people haven't been able to go. I've made a difference. I've left a footprint after myself. So, I'm saying all sides of it. I'm saying the good things, the bad things, and overall, I'm happy. I'm content. I'm satisfied. But I really want to spend the last few years just doing the sort of things that I want to do without getting dragged back into all this.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see sort of how that progresses for you as time goes on, and the madness of the world sort of continues, and you feel that pull again between family and your mission in a way. It was interesting you mentioned that you wanted to join the army when you were younger before things shifted, and then coming over here. So I wonder if that has always been a part of you. You've wanted to have a mission, something greater than yourself, almost like a warrior within you, perhaps.
I remember when I was a young kid, I used to read a lot of biographies about famous people that have become part of the history, you know? And I always remember there was something about them that they live forever in a way. You know, people still talk about them. So in a way, they still exist, which is different from someone who's just had a very ordinary life, hasn't left a footprint, hasn't changed anything. No one talks about them anymore. You know, they're finished sort of thing, like, you know. But, you know, you talk about, like, you know, the great heroes throughout history, like, you know, who have made a huge difference to everyone else's lives. They never die, really, do they? I mean, that immortality, they've sort of, in a way, they've achieved it. Maybe they're not physically here, but they still exist in some way. So maybe it was that. Maybe that's sort of like what got me interested. But I also always had this sense of, if I could see something evil, if I could see something wrong, I had to do something about it.
Yeah, and I suppose leave your mark on the world, essentially.
Yeah. I think when a man walks, he's got to leave a footprint of himself. He's got to be able to look back and say, look, you know, I made a difference. This life wasn't just wasted. It wasn't just like for nothing. You know, I made a difference. And that gives you a lot of satisfaction. Believe me, it does.
Let's say, okay, we're looking back and you're looking back in your life and I've left this footprint. Is it the results from that, or do you think it's the journey? Do you think it's the fact that you've gone through that, tested yourself, challenged yourself, or is it the sort of facts at the end, or the mark that you've
I think it's
made?
both. I think they both complement each other. You know, you look back, you know, when you were going through that journey, you might have thought, like, oh my God, this is so hard, you know. And then you look back and you think, oh, I made it. I went through it. It's very satisfactory, isn't it? That, you know, you think, like, you know, you achieved it. It's like, look, I was telling you before coming here, I've been doing like 50 press-ups a day, like, you know. And it gets very hard after 35 press-ups. Then you try to stretch it to, say, 47, and then you've got 3 more. And if you do those last 3 ones as well, once you finish, you think, wow, I've done it. I've done it again. you know? You feel pleased about yourself rather than having sat idly on the chair and watching TV. You know, you've done something. So, and it's all in that category, you know. I think you've got a choice in life, either just be idle and do nothing and achieve nothing, or do something, make a difference, achieve something. And then when you look back, you get satisfaction knowing that you went through that hardship that you had to go through, and you get satisfaction knowing that you made a footprint and made a difference.
That's always resonated with me. Yeah.
I can tell, actually. You come across as someone like that, Harrison.
Just chasing the difficult stuff. Yeah. I was just obsessed with personal development. And it was like having cold showers each day. Like, that was one thing. And it was interesting because, I mean, everyone's got different degrees of challenging times, and it's all relative. But I think there's a sense of when you sort of go through the tougher seasons, it gets to a point, I believe, where you kind of know at this stage what it is. And you know that at the other side of it, there's going to be a better time, and you're going to be happy that you went through the tougher times. Did you find that yourself? I know you mentioned like divorce there being one of them. Did you find that you were able to have that perspective shift during the moment? Did you know at that point this is part of your journey and you're going to grow from it and you're building up resilience, or did that only come for you after events transpired in your life?
No, I think at the time when you go through it, you don't know. You don't know what the outcome is going to be. But I think that's part of it. That's part of the hardship that you look back on, because you couldn't have been certain at the time how it's going to work out. If you were certain how it was going to work out, it would be a lot easier, because, you know, okay, I'm having a bit of a hard time now, but, you know, tomorrow things going to be rosy. So not knowing how it's going to end up is part of the hardship. Otherwise, it's not going to be that hard.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an element of faith there throughout the journey, which is needed perhaps. So even though you might not know actually how this is going to turn out, it could be, who knows, but there's an element of, you know what, something's like, I know I'm going to be okay perhaps. Do you think that's necessary? Or
I think when you're younger, you have some sort of feeling of invincibility, you know? When I was younger, I never thought anything bad is going to happen to me, you know? I really thought I was invincible. I didn't think I was going to get ill. You know, it's like getting ill was something that happened to other people. And then it happens to you. And then you think, actually, you're quite vulnerable as well. And, you know, I've never had any spiritual beliefs, right? But I've always envied people that have a spiritual belief, right? I've never practiced the religion, right? But I always envy people that can rely on a greater being, that can lean on a greater being. I think if you believe in God, if you believe in life after death, it makes things easier for you. It makes it easier to go through hardship. If you're not a spiritual person like me, it's actually so much harder, you know? And there are times when I've been in that vulnerable position where, you know, religion, spirituality has really appealed to me. But I've also been a very logical person. And the logic of it never makes sense to me. You know, some book that's written thousands of years ago, we don't even know if it was written like that, you know, and people claim that it's word of God and there's all sorts of contradictions in it. And, you know, the logical side of it never makes any sense to me. However, I've come to sort of like formulate something myself for what God is. And I think God is the sum of all knowledge. And our purpose in this life is to increase our knowledge. The more we increase our knowledge, the closer that we get to that super entity that I call God. We'll never get there, but the more knowledgeable we become. Knowledge is power. So if you imagine this super entity that has all the knowledge, the sum of all knowledge, that is the most powerful entity that can exist. And that, you know, I don't look at God as some old man with a beard in the clouds or something. It's this subjective entity, the sum of all knowledge that I think we're all moving towards, you know, I mean, as a total mass of entity, you know, if you, the entire population throughout history, we have become more knowledgeable and we're becoming more and more knowledgeable. So we're all moving closer to God in some way. But yeah, I've always envied people that can rely on a greater being.
interesting. So I was going to ask you sort of where that envy would have led you, and it seems like it has led you down, asking a bit more questions, or what are we doing here? What are we trying to do? And as you've alluded to, I think having that belief, I know for myself, for example, that it just takes all of the weight off for me, because if we imagine, like, let's say we're like a soul in a physical body, right? When you have that belief, it's like, okay, well, I'm going through a challenging time, but I know that I need to go through this for my own spiritual journey, for my soul's evolution.
And you're confident that something is looking after you, you know?
Yeah, and I think just a sense of, the way I like to look at it is, I know that by what I'm seeing here, I know that I'm so much more than it, because I'm not, like, for example, I think a lot of the time when we really struggle in the human form, I think it's because we're attached to our thoughts and our mind. Whereas if you then realize, at least from my perspective, okay, I'm a being in a human suit, and this identity that I've got for myself, it was just given to me at birth. Or the, like, say, triggers, or the way I react to stuff, the way I think about stuff, my job, this podcast, all of it, I'm giving it its meaning. But outside of that, this is just a physical plane. So for me, it's a case of, okay, right, we have this experience on Earth, and then, almost like take off the goggles, and then, oh, that was fun. Okay. here. And I think when having that belief, just again, you detach from everything, because even if you're really going through it, even let's say like a death of somebody, for example. So the way I like to look at that now is I won't actually feel sorry for the person. I'll feel sorry for the family members and people who really got on well with them. But then I think, okay, well, that person is like in a better place now. And that for me is they're just experiencing pure love without what's happening here on earth. So there's a really cool document which one of the guests actually recommended. It was like a course in miracles. And so it's essentially the teachings of Jesus, but without any sense of like indoctrination or using it or manipulative tactics that you might have seen from the church, for example, to control people. And the stuff in there has really resonated with me. And it takes ideas. So for example, heaven and hell, but then not in the traditional sense, like you were saying, man in the sky. And it's actually likens it to, no, actually hell here is this earth. And it's because everything we perceive is real, and that's why it's hell, essentially. Like you were saying, the suffering, the regime in Iran being an example. So that's essentially our hell. And this idea of heaven is when you get to this sense of awakening, for example, where you realize, okay, actually, I'm not attached to these thoughts. I'm greater than that. Yeah. I'm a being, and yeah, I'm just here to experience what being a human is like, essentially. Yeah. So I could see how having that faith or perspective on the world can, lighten things up a bit, especially with, I can only imagine, like, if you're experiencing real suffering and you think, right, there's no way out, and there's seeing, like, if that's all that there is, I just know my perspective, I think I would struggle to have hope, I think. Because it's like, well, if this is it, that means evil must win. And for me, I just don't see a world where evil wins, because let's say you have a believer in this creator, God, however you want to call it. Well, if God's the creator of everything and God is all loving, and then evil can do what it likes, but it's not going to last the test of time. But I think there's a lot of nuances to it, and especially when you look at like the extreme Islam, like there's going to be, I'm not saying this is your case, but when people see that, or they've been at the other side of it. So I had a podcast guest on who he experienced a lot of shame as a kid because he was brought up in a very strict Catholic family, and he didn't know what to do with his sexual urges, and he shamed himself. So then he, again, went polar opposite. And now he's just, whatever you see with religion, if you could come up with the most opposite contrasting beliefs possible to traditional religion, that's essentially him now. Now, again, if you see this like crazy extreme Islam, essentially, then naturally, and that's you're like, right, this is what religion is. Well, fuck that.
Yeah.
Then I could see why, as a collective, there is this. Actually, no, like religion. Let's not go anywhere near it. But now, I think there's a pull now. I think you have this group of people where they're either atheist or there is a search for a deeper meaning. I think there's a search for a deeper, what are we doing here? There must be something more than this box. So I think people are getting curious.
Look, organised religion has never interested me. Organised religion will never interest me, I don't think. I don't understand why someone has to earn money as from religion and have a profession of religion, you know. It doesn't make sense to me. But I also realise that we have limitations. Look, when we were in our mother's womb, we didn't know about this outside world and what was going on. Our world was limited to whatever it was in the womb and all the senses that, you know, we had developed. So who knows after this, there might be something outside of what our senses can sense that we don't know about. And the likelihood is that there is. And talking about miracles, I mean, I have met people that have told me about miracles in their lives, and I think some of them are genuine. I'll give you one example. This is fascinating. I met a bodyguard in Spain, and became very friendly with him. Really nice guy. Really, I mean, he couldn't hurt a fly. He's like, he looked like Shrek, twice the size of me, like, you know. He looked evil, but he had a heart of gold. Like, you know, when he finished his food and everything, he put it in a plastic bag, and then he kind of like leave it for stray dogs and cats, and, you know, all sorts of like nice things that, you know, that I can go through what he was doing. But it was very religious. Now, I won't say what religion, because, you know, it doesn't really matter in this context, yeah? But he never wanted to impose his beliefs on others. He never told me, oh, you know, he never tried to sort of like pull me saying like, oh, you know, you got to be of this religion and that, like, you know. He just practiced his religion. He was very religious, and I could get on with him. I could have a drink sitting next to him. I could do things that he wouldn't do, and he wouldn't have a problem with that. And I asked him once, I said, why are you so religious? And he told me about something that happened to him at the age of 16. So he was on a motorbike, and he was coming out of this thing, turning into the main road. There was a lorry coming, and he thought, okay, the lorry is quite a distance away. But what he didn't realise was another car overtaking the lorry. So as he turned with the motorbike, the car hit him. He flew in the air. And then he said, it was as if he left his body and he was floating in the sky, and he could see what was happening. The driver of the car that hit him was like hitting himself on the edge. Oh my God, I've killed someone's son. And, you know, and he could see his own body, but he seemed to be outside the body. And then they got another car, and they put that body, which is like his, into that car, trying to, you know, take him to hospital. And he was saying like a Superman, I was following the car. He said, I could see the number plate of that car, right? And later he checked it, and that was the car that took him to hospital. Momentarily, he sort of like diverted. He went behind this like mountain, and it was like looking over what's on the other side of the mountain. Everything was very serene. Everything was very peaceful. Everything was very green. Everyone was having whatever they wanted to instantly, like, you know. And then he sort of like went back following the car, and he went to the hospital, and the doctor pulled out, he had the telephone book at the time, you know, before people had mobile phones, they used to write, you know, telephone numbers in a little phone book. Doctor took that out and rang one of the numbers, and that person said, oh yeah, he's so-and-so's son. So he then contacted the father, and he said it was as if like I was between the telephone, between the doctor and the telephone. I could hear what the doctor was saying, and I could hear what my dad was saying. They come to the hospital. He said he saw his mum, and he was trying to grab her like this, and his hands were just going through her body. Right? And the doctor sort of like took his pulse and sort of like realised, no, that's it, and had decided, it was just about to declare him dead. And then his uncle came over. He took his pulse again and said, no, doctor, there is a little pulse here, there is a little pulse here. And the doctor came back again and goes, oh, you're right. He was in hospital for 6 months and he survived. And he said, if you've been through that experience, you're not going to say, no, there is no God. He said, look, he said, when the time comes and we all, you know, appear before the Lord, he's going to say to me, you've got no excuse. Potkin does, because he never went through that miracle experience, but you saw everything. You know, you've got no excuse. That's why he said, I'm religious. And I said, yeah, fine. It's you know, fantastic. I'm glad, you know, who am I to change your ways? You know, you happy being the way you are, and you know, you're a nice person, and I'm all for it. And you don't try to impose it on anyone else. It's fantastic. And I'm still friends with him to this day. He's one of the nicest person I've ever. He took on 16 blokes once in a nightclub. And these were like not ordinary civilians. They were like, you know, hardcore sort of like, you know. He's as brave as anything. He's got no fear in him. Nicest guy ever in the world. And yeah, I'm very privileged to have him as a friend.
Yeah, what a wicked story. I was imagining that, like all the visuals and following the...
I mean, I've read about this out-of-body experience that some people have gone through when they've had near-death experience. But this was someone that I personally know, and he's told me, and he's not the sort of bloke that would make things up. You know, I trust him to that extent. So that's why that was so different from just like reading about it. You read about it, you don't know if you trust it or not. Someone could have just made up some story to, you know, for people to read sort of thing. But this was a real person that I knew. Yeah.
So it kind of leaves you like, okay, like it's, would you say it's like agnostic maybe, as based off of what you've discussed so far?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I think we have limitations. You know, we don't know, you know, we have 5 senses and we're aware of what we see, but it doesn't mean that's all and end to it. There might be something much greater, and there probably is. But that's different from organised religion. And even though I'm sort of like really not spiritual, even though religion has never made any sense to me, it's something that I find completely illogical. So long as someone just like practices the religion for their own private beliefs and that, and doesn't try to impose it on anyone else, I've got no problems with that. You know, who am I to what have I got to offer him if I take that religion away from him? I remember I'd gone to America. I was actually a guest of the State Department. It was a State Department program. It was a 3-week State Department program. We went to different places in America. The idea was that you learn about how the state is run, and then, you know, the system and everything. And then you go back to your country, and then you sort of like say, you know, tell other people. It's something that they've been running since 1940. It's called IVLP, International Visitors Leadership Program. One of the places we went to was a church in Memphis where Martin Luther King used to preach. And it was like a Sunday service, and I was sitting there and I was just like watching what was going on. First, there was someone who came and spoke and encouraged the people in the congregation to give blood. You know, they were, all black in that church, and you know, she was saying like, you know, why it's important for black people to give blood for all these like hereditary diseases that, you know, that are around. Then there was like a band of school kids, you know, perform something, some music sort of thing, all sorts of different programs in there. And there was nothing else in that area, right, where that church was. It was just a small town, you know, maybe a restaurant or something, but nothing else to do. This was the focal point of the people that lived there. This is what they looked forward to. This is what they dressed up for. This is what they were like spending their week, you know, rehearsing their music, you know, their speeches, their performances, everything like, you know. Who am I to take that away from them? What am I going to give them back if I take that away from them? You know, I was sitting there, you know, I didn't have their beliefs, but I was enjoying that. The fact that, you know, it's keeping them busy. It's, you know, it looked like it was something for the better, for the good. You know, it was some sort of order, morality, and getting together sort of thing. So, you know, on that level, I don't have a problem. My problem is with organised religions that want to impose themselves on you, that try to force you to think their way. You know, this thing about, you know, heretical. What does that mean, heretical? Just because I think differently from you. You know, and we've seen throughout history, you know, heretics being punished and all that. It's something that I think is extremely evil. Just because someone doesn't think the way you think, that you want to, like, you know, put them down, and you want to destroy them, you want to kill them. How evil is that? How can that be God's work? How can that be, you know, if there is a God that we want to worship, there's got to be something good. A God that punishes heretics isn't good, it's evil.
Well, I remember this was one of the things, because I met a preacher in Edgware once, and I remember speaking to him for about 2 hours because I was just fascinated by it, and my curiosity was heading that way. And yeah, that was one of the things he said. I said, well, hang on, what about all this corrupt stuff and all these dodgy people and the way religion has infiltrated? And he said, yeah, well, these people weren't very Christian-like, were they? And so I could see that perspective of how people sort of get into religions, and you're going to get like the bad eggs and use it to their own gain. Perhaps it's with everything in life. You're always going to get, no matter how good a thing is, you're always going to get some people in there, some evil actors. And again, I think this is why this whole like black and white thinking can be quite dangerous. Generally speaking, I think a part of having an open mind, a curious mind, is not seeing things as black and white, but also being willing to admit where perhaps you might have been wrong in the past. I know that's something that you've mentioned as well. And I think when we do get really certain in our beliefs, that's when not only can that be damaging, but I think also we stop growing ourselves, right? Yeah.
And we start harming others because, we just can't see anyone else thinking differently to us. I think one thing that I've learned is we have different views because we've had different experiences. And I think what is really good is if we try to understand each other's experiences. There was this Iraqi guy, 12 members of his family were murdered by Saddam Hussein. For him, Khomeini was their savior, right? Because, he sort of like had a hand in sort of like getting rid of Saddam in Iraq and that, So he was a Khomeini supporter. Politically, he was opposite me. But I could see the experience that he went through that led him to having that point of view. I opposed his views vehemently, but I could understand, and I wanted him to understand what I think like I do. And when you can then talk to each other because you understand each other's experiences, I think that's a big step forward because, rather than just like, straight away writing someone off because they think differently than you, try to understand why do they think like that? What's been their experience? If it's just like personal greed or just ignorance or something like that, then that's different. But if it's an experience that you haven't been through, and if you put yourself in that position, you think maybe I would end up like that, then you've got to be understanding of the other point of view.
That's always resonated with me. Yeah. I certainly agree. I remember, because again, I think when I grew up, I was kind of detached from politics. I thought not really my thing. And then all I saw was, again, when you go onto social media, it was always, right, if you vote for these people, then you're X. If you vote for these people, you're Y. And it got to the point where I'm thinking, hang on, how could you just paint people with one brush? You don't know what they've been through. You don't know their experiences. So that's always resonated with me. And again, it's why I've always just questioned not only my judgments about people, but then also just the collective narrative against certain people, certain groups. It ties back to our earlier conversation about, okay, what do you give your energy to, and what do you kind of learn to detach from, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we've covered quite a bit of ground. It's been wicked to learn about your story. We've covered.
I haven't talked to anyone about this sort of thing that we talked about today for a long while. It was a bit unexpected, actually, as well. I didn't think the conversation was going to go this way, but it was quite interesting. It was, there are a lot of things that I sort of like were in the back of my mind and I hadn't spoken about, and I sort of like vented it all out. So it was, it's kind of pleasing for myself as well. So thanks, Harrison.
Has a different dimension. Yeah. Most welcome. What we'll do, we'll head into the closing traditions of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
The first two questions are asked by myself every week. And then the final question is asked by one of the Growth Voyage listeners.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question is nice and simple.
Good.
Well, for some people it's simple. Others struggle with it. But it's a song recommendation. Your favourite song?
Song recommendation. My favourite song is the theme to Godfather. No matter how many times I listen to that, I never get bored of it. Another one that I find very inspiring, especially when I'm in the gym, is Eye of the Tiger. It's, about, being on the street and rising up to the challenge of your rivals. And that was just a fantastic song. I mean, I remember when that came out, I couldn't stop listening to it. It was, I've got a terrible voice. I can't sing anything, and I can't remember the words to a song. But that was like one of the few songs that I could memorize, because I was just listening to it so many times and I wasn't getting bored with it, And even now, if I go to the gym and, I'm struggling to do those last reps or something, like, if I'm listening to Eye of the Tiger, I think it makes it easier.
Yeah, it's one of those.
It's very inspiring.
One of those, right?
Yeah.
You always have to save it for the end of the way, right? This is my last resort.
It's ideal for training, for boxing, for martial arts, for training in the gym, weightlifting. It's absolutely spot on.
Yeah. I'm going to add that to my gym playlist now. Yeah, it's one of the classics. Second one is a book recommendation.
Yeah. One of the books that was really eye-opening to me, and in a lot of ways it was so different to other books about history, is by Niall Ferguson, Squares and Towers. And it's just looking at history from a different angle. I mean, normally when we look at history, people talk about, say, if you're looking at the American Revolution, they talk about the main figures in that, George Washington, for example. But in this book, it talks about nodes. So you have this network of a movement with certain main figures like the American Revolution, George Washington, but there's also these nodes where a lot of connections are made through those people that are standing at that node, and they're like lesser known people in history. So, I mean, we could spend another podcast talking about that book. It's complicated to explain what it's about, but let me just suffice to say that it's a completely different way of reading history. Yeah. And it's about hierarchies, and it's about networks, and it's about how hierarchies grow, and then the networks can bring hierarchies down, and how technological revolution normally causes some sort of like major incidents in history, like, for example, the printing press, and how that led to the Reformation and the split in the church and everything. And lo and behold, we're going through one at the moment. So it's let me not talk about it too much, because then it'd be just another complete podcast. But seriously, it's a very fresh, different way of looking at history, reading history, by Niall Ferguson. I've read a few other books from him as well. The Ascent of Money, for example, and he does a lot of podcasts. I think he's at some American university at the moment. But he's a very learned man, very wise guy. He's just before coming here, actually, he done a podcast talking about Iran, and I really sort of like was in tune with him, listening to him. He was saying all the right things, I think. He's got very good detailed knowledge of history, and then he applies that into forecasting the future, based on historical examples in the past and everything. But yeah, I'd recommend that one.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll certainly give that a read. I wonder if it ties in any way to this idea that a lot of the wars that we see and a lot of the tensions that we see around the world are manufactured in a way, that there is a certain degree of control there already. I don't know if that ties in with that at all.
It's not about that. It's not about manufactured wars and controls. It sort of like tries to explain how monumental historical events happen, and what's the background of them, and how different forces shape and form from nothing. And it's really, yes, it's really about this. It's about hierarchies. So we get like a state and becomes all powerful, and then like these networks that form can then bring down these towers, these hierarchies, the unknown role of the other key people in the events, that maybe they're not sort of like so talked about in other history books, but because of like how they connected this network, how these nodes were connected, are very, very important.
So
it's complicated to explain.
I can
and you've
see,
got to read it, but honestly, it'd be like a way of looking at history like you've never read before.
Awesome.
It's not just like telling you, in 1873 this happened and this guy killed this guy and this. It's a fresh scientific look at history.
It's kind of like almost like behind the scenes, or okay, you see this at the surface level, but this is actually explains why it happens. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. The final question is asked by one of the Growth Voyage listeners, and this one comes in from Martine, who asks, if you could go back to the start of your journey, what would you tell yourself and why?
It's always with hindsight that you can see all the mistakes that you made in life. And obviously, if I had the chance again, I would not make the same mistakes again. I'm trying to think about which mistake I can talk about publicly, and I'd rather not. But I think we've all made a lot of mistakes. And when we look back and you think like, things could have been so different if I didn't make that mistake. But at the same time, I don't think I know anyone, and I don't think it'd be possible for anyone not to have ever made a mistake. Life is about making mistakes and learning from mistakes. It depends whether you can learn from your mistakes or not, If you don't learn from your mistakes, then it's a sorry state of affairs. But if you can put things right and have a second chance, then, I think that's part of... It's like a baby growing up, you fall down and you learn how to sort of like walk and how to go up the stairs, and, you bump your head and everything and you learn. That's life. Make mistakes. Don't be fearful of making mistakes, but learn from the mistakes you make.
Did you find that you've been able to learn the lessons as you've gone along in your journey?
Mostly, yes.
Yeah.
But who knows? Maybe I'm making a mistake now, and I'll find out later. But yeah, I think I'd like to say that I've learned from my mistakes, and where I could have made amends, I have. But sometimes you can't, unfortunately. Maybe it's the way I've treated someone, for example, and then I've realised how wrong I was, and maybe it's something that I can't amend now. That makes me feel bad. But there are mistakes that I've made, and I think even if I haven't been able to amend from them, but I've learned from them.
And I suppose that ties in because, as you were saying, I think sometimes, at least I know in my experience, sometimes you have to experience the same lesson over and over before you really start to learn it. But then also ties into what you were saying before. We'd go back and change all these things, but then do you still think you'd be the same person you are today if you were able to go back in time?
Who knows? Hard to say, really. It's one of those things that you'd never be able to give a true answer because you just don't know. Life just branches in different ways, and then, what would have happened if you turned left, at that point, you just don't know. Yeah. It could have. There's been a lot of times where, at the time, I thought, "Oh my God, this is so bad. What's happened?" And then I've looked back on it and I thought that was meant to happen because of what happened then. I went through this route, and things ended up a lot better. When they say behind every cloud there's a silver lining, it really is like that. Sometimes you think like this thing that's just happened. This is the worst thing that's happened to me. And then you look back at it and you think, hang on a second, that was meant to happen. And it was good that it happened.
Yeah. And it's also the wisdom that you accumulate along the way.
Definitely, yeah.
And no one can take that away from you.
Yeah. So. I think maybe I'd revise my formula for God. So God is a sum of all knowledge and wisdom. And the more knowledge and wisdom that you get, the closer you get to God.
I like that.
Yeah.
I really like that. Yeah,
There you go.
That's a wicked way to finish things. And I've just enjoyed piecing together sort of your journey, why you're doing the things that you do. I think there's certainly some lessons in there we can all take away from.
And to be honest with you, I've learned myself from just talking to you, so it's good therapy.
Awesome. Potkin, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
So I've got an X account with about 20,000 followers. I've got a YouTube account with about 13,000 followers. There's a thing called Muckrack that automatically records all the articles that you write. And if you just Google my name, Potkin Azarmehr, Muckrack, it lists you all the articles that I've written before for various publications. My Instagram is private. I had a Facebook account, but it was closed down by Facebook. And I lost a lot of sort of like pictures that I'd posted there. I never thought that they're going to close down my account. So the Instagram one, I've just tried to keep private just because I posted there pictures that I don't want to lose, I don't want to sort of like, just in case something happens to my phone or something. I want it to be somewhere. So it's nothing. Most of the stuff that sometimes I story the things that I'm, the political things and all that, but most of the posts are just about like me playing golf or playing snooker or doing a bit of martial art or just being with my family members. It's just things that I want to keep somewhere safe. So I try to be not controversial just in case that gets closed down as well. But yeah, so probably X and YouTube and Muckrack is the best way to find out about things that I've written and things I do.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, we'll put these all in the description.
Thank you.
Potkin, thank you so much.
Thank you.